Hello, I'm Todd Froemming with Syvantis Technologies, and today we're going to cover part 3 of our Inventory Best Practices series to help you learn more about inventory and item management, from initial setup to maintenance and everything in between. Today, we're sharing our recommendations for item maintenance. Everyone manages inventory differently, but there are some things that are pretty standard, so I'll share our general recommendations with you on those today. We would also encourage you to communicate your needs with your partner during your migration or implementation to create the best BC environment for your users. And like always, if you have questions, drop them in the chat so we can address them once I start, and we will respond to everyone after the class with answers for you. The first step in inventory management is finding your items. So you can do that a couple different ways. You can click on sales and go to items. It's a little bit confusing that it's in there and not under a spot called inventory. Or you can just, like always, search for items. All right, there's my item list. I'm going to do a little bit of navigation in the item list for you before I start into the details of the items. It is very similar to customers and vendors and chart of accounts. You're looking at those type of lists as well. In inventory, however, when you go to the list function and view your layout options, you have an option for tall tiles, and it shows the item picture if that's something that you guys want to track. Also, you can do regular tiles. This one's a little bit easier to look at. It has smaller pictures. You can see more on the screen. But I'll tell you, in most cases, you're going to want to work with just the list and the list itself. When you look at the list, you'll see that there's a lot of columns across here, and some of these really aren't needed for a day-to-day work. So I'm going to show you one that I don't use for sure when I personalize this. Is I'm going to remove this field for substitutes because it's really just taking up space. So you can see you'll want to add the columns that you want to have in here on a regular basis, and you want to remove the columns that you don't need to see, because if you're not using assembly bonds is just taking up space on the list. A lot of times we'll get asked to modify the list and bring in things that don't appear in the standard personalization options under your field ads. Some of those are not just quantity on hand, but quantity on sales orders, quantity on purchase orders, things like that. That's a modification that Syvantis can make or your partner can make for you. Like in other lists, more information can be found by clicking the information icon up at the top right corner. This takes up quite a bit of real estate. So on an item list, depending on how much you have, you may not want it to show. But again, there's all the information you really want to see on a regular basis should be in this information pane. And this is, again, another area that we'll modify for our clients quite often to put in the data in there that they actually want to see on a day-to-day basis. Navigating the item list is pretty similar to what you're used to with vendor lists, customer lists, and other ones that you maybe looked at. Don't forget that you can sort by any of these fields. So a good example on this one is I do ascending on quantity on hand, and I see my negative items. It's just a nice little thing on an item list to be able to see the items you're negative on, because it gives you an indication that there's probably something wrong with your count on those items. Again, your system settings are probably going to be set that you don't allow negative items anyway, but since this is a test company and we do a lot of stuff in it, there's almost always negative items in it. And don't forget, you can do that on any field you want. You can sort by unit cost, descending or ascending. Just pick the thing that you want to look at. The other thing, just like your search on vendors and customers, is you can click the search button and find items real easily. I'm going to search for an item that's a switch, and I know in my description it says on/off on the switch. You can see because I searched off, any item with the word off in it will show up, including coffee, because it has off in coffee. You can search a lot easier in Business Central than you can in other systems. You don't need to know the item number. You just need to know part of the description. You can even search by the amount and find anything that's got a unit cost of $28.13. It checks every field when you're doing a search, makes it very easy to find what you're looking for. Just like customers, vendors, and chart of accounts, you can filter your list and your inventory items as well. We do have a class called Introduction to Business Central that is entirely free to access, and we do have an entire video on that. And I highly recommend you go look at the filtering class. So let's go to an actual item card and walk you through some of the settings on the item card. I'm going to just pick Athens Desk and click on it to open it up. All right. I'm going to look at each one of these sections separately, and I'm going to close them down just to show you something first here. You can see when everything is closed or collapsed, you have some basic information showing up here on the right. It's your cost, your sales price, what your posting groups are, your quantity available, those type of things. Unit of measure is this one. When you expand each one of these out, there's some information in these. Now, you'll want to customize these again to show the things that you want when show less is selected. You don't need to see all the information in the show more field all the time. Some things that we have here that are pretty obvious, the number and the description. Blocks this for posting. And again, I'm going to point out one more time, when you hover over any field in Business Central, it'll tell you what that field is. So like I said, this specifies related record is blocked from being posted in transactions, which means you aren't going to use it on a purchase order to be able to post it. You're not going to use it on a sales order to be able to post it. It blocks the entire item. The type of inventory, there's 3 different types of inventory: inventory, service, and non-inventory. Inventory item is your classic inventory item. You're tracking quantities, you're tracking costs, you're tracking everything that's related to that inventory item. A service item and a non-inventory item don't track quantities. So when you think about it, you don't really have a quantity in stock of hours for a service technician. You would be able to sell an item of 2 hours of service and not have a quantity tracked on that. But you can track the cost and the sales price under a service item. A non-inventory item works the same way. It's just an item that's not kept in inventory or stock. We generally see people use this for purchase orders when they're buying, office supplies like a box of paper or paper towels or something like that, where they want to put it on a purchase order and have an item on a purchase order, but they're never going to receive it in as a quantity. They're just going to invoice it out when they pick it, when they get it in. Last date modified is the last date an item was modified. It does come in handy to see this, so I kind of try and leave it a little visible. GTIN is something you won't use if you're in the US. It has to do with barcoding, and it's a European thing. Item categories are really nice to have. It's a way to slice and dice your inventory items into different categories or groups. To make it kind of clear is, I'm going to just show you this one. I'm going to go into here. I'm going to go to the full list. And you can see, not only do I have an option for table, desk, chair under a main heading of furniture, if I go even deeper into this, again, here you can see the parent category is furniture. The code is table for the category. I can also do color, depth, height, and any other parameters that I want to set on this. The reason this is important is if you need attributes. So say you're selling shirts and you want to know you're selling red shirts with a certain size, you're going to have size and color as options in here. So when people are purchasing these things on a website or on e-commerce, they can sort by color, they can sort by size and find the thing that they actually need. Not everybody uses attributes. Not everybody uses the categories, but you'll know when you need to have them, and you're going to probably want some help setting those up if you do need to use those. One thing I have seen people do is just use categories for reporting purposes only. They want to slice and dice their inventory on a report. They're not worried about having it on their website or anything like that, but they just want to know that they can group things on reports, and that's an easy category. A category is an easy way to do that. Service item groups work the same as item categories for service items. I don't have those set up here. Extended text is something that you can add and turn it on and add it so that you can have extended text on your sales order lines and your purchase order line. What that allows you to do is when that line gets printed out, it shows more information than just the item number and the quantity that and the item description that you're selling or purchasing. A lot of times vendors want to have a little bit more detail on the item that you're purchasing. Some customers require certain detail. You can add that by doing extended text. Common item number is interesting. I'll hover over that one and you can read it while I'm talking. When you have intercompanies, sometimes you'll have 3 companies in the same Business Central instance, and they sell the exact same thing, but because of where they buy it or where they're selling it, the part number is different. This gives you a spot to assign a common item number that all the companies can use when they're doing internal communications, which makes it a whole lot easier to talk about something. If everybody's calling an item a different thing or has a different name for an item, it's just hard to communicate that across the board. Purchasing codes can be used if needed. And then default variant mandatory, if it exists, is generally going to be set to no. Again, it's one of those things that you'll know if you need it. And if it's set to yes, there's a reason why somebody set that to yes. Going to the next section of inventory, I'll open that one up. You can see my collapsed mode. I have the information that I need to have available to me. And the show more, there's quite a bit in here that you don't see all the time. Again, you'll want to set this to look the way you want it to look for what you do every day. Shelf number is kind of interesting. It's like a basic, very basic version of using warehousing. I've seen it used before where they only need to know which shelf it's on when they do inventory counts, but they don't care where it is when they pick items. You've got full warehousing capability in Business Central. Shelf number is just a really basic way for smaller locations to track where their inventory is in their facilities. Created from catalog item, is usually going to be set to no, but if you did create this item from a catalog and it matches up with your catalog, that will probably be turned on to yes. Search description. This search description, if I go back up to items, is going to default with the Athens desk, same description, all right? Search description is kind of a holdover from older Nav or Navision systems, and that's the people that I see that use this the most. I generally just like having it in there because when I do show less, I can see the quantities that I'm looking at relate to that item without having to look up here or go back up into item and see it. It just tells me what item I'm looking at when I'm looking at inventory. Some other things in this area are quantity on hand. Business Central has a lot of hyperlinks, and in inventory, they work really well. Quantity on hand will give you a ledger list as we wait for it to come up. And it'll show all the ins and outs of your inventory that gets you to the quantity that you actually have on hand today, right? Another example, quantities on purchase orders. Show you the purchase order number, how many are on that purchase order, and expected receipt date. Again, these can be changed to work the way you need them to do that's going to work the best for you. If you use manufacturing or if you do assemblies or anything like that or use jobs, you'll see there's a whole bunch of other quantity options in here. Generally, the ones I'll see that are visible are quantity on hand, quantity on sales order, quantity on purchase order. Those are the ones that you're going to want showing most of the time. Again, when you do show less, just hide them so that you only have to look at them when you need to see them. You have an option for net weight, gross weight, unit volume. Default on negative inventory is usually going to be yes. Over receipt code is something I don't see people use a lot, but I know that in my past experiences, it would come in handy. You can set codes that allow over receipt of what you put on the purchase order. Example of that is I had a vendor that knew that if I needed 10 of something and he had 2 extras, he could send me those 2 extras and I would receive them and pay him for them. It was a trusted vendor, but somebody I knew wasn't going to just send me things that I didn't need. So if I set that to over receipt and then we get 11 in and it's set to be 10% over quantity, I know that the person in the warehouse can just receive that 11 without approval. 12 came in, they'd have to talk to me before they could receive it. So you can set codes like this up to fit your needs. Cost and posting. We'll slowly get through all of these, just bear with me. A lot of the stuff in here comes from your system settings for inventory, and you won't change most of this. What I want to point out is your costing method. There's a lot of options here. This is already set up for your system. The one thing we recommend is on a costing method, you leave it the same for all items. We do have some people that will use average on some items and FIFO on other items. In terms of costing and sales, you generally want to have everything to be the same category for costing method. Another little note, we've noticed a lot less people using standard costing and a lot more people using average costing. Again, this is set up for you already. You do not change this in the system because it will change how your margins are calculated on line items on sales. The unit cost is your current unit cost. The last direct cost is the last price you paid for it on a purchase order. Standard cost will most likely not be used unless you maybe have manufacturing and you're using standard cost. Indirect costs adds things like shipping or freight and can be added into the cost of the item as a sub part of the item cost. Cost is adjusted and cost is posted to GL. I can click on these. I'm doing it right now. You have to trust me. they're not working, it won't let you change these. These are part of your system settings. They're here for information only, but I will tell you the standard recommendation for this is they're both always on. So if you notice one of these is turned off, you may want to check with your partner or somebody who you work with that knows more about it and figure out why you have those turned off. Again, recommendation, turn it on and leave it on. Just like sales discounts, you can do purchase price discounts. You can set those up if that's something that you take advantage of. The net invoice quantity will actually get me to the same list that I got before. It shows the ledger entries for that item. It's going to look familiar when we go in there. Foreign trade, tariffs, those things, if you use those, you'll know that you need to use them and you'll have some settings for that. I'm not going to cover those. However, what I really want to show you is the general product posting group and the inventory posting group. These are very important. I'm only showing you this so you know what they are. I don't want you to ever change these because it will change how things post to your general ledger. I'm going to go into the inventory posting group first. And I'm going to select it from the full list again so I can see the details. I'll pick finish because I think it's a little cleaner. Go to setup. What you're doing here is you're setting the inventory account that you're going to use when you post inventory transactions. Again, it can be set by site or location. Generally, you'll see 5 or 6 locations in here if you have multiple locations, but they'll all have the same inventory account because in most cases, you use one inventory account for your product. However, some people have different inventory accounts for raw materials, for sold parts, and for finished goods. So depending on how you have that set up, it will use that account. If you change this account, it will change your financial statements. So do not ever change this account. You may be curious to see if you can even get into it. You may not have rights to even see that. But that's where that account comes from. Even more accounts are set up in the general product posting group. And these are set and can never be changed as well, but I'm going to show them to you just so you can see, because it's really important to understand how this works. You'll see, this is where I get my sales account, my sales credit memo account, discount. If I scroll over a little bit farther, purchase account, accounts payable, cost of goods sold account. All these accounts are the distributions that will hit when you're purchasing items, receiving items, selling items. These are the accounts that get used by default in the system for posting transactions. So again, I'm only showing it to you so you know it exists, so you know why it's doing what it's doing, but you should never change these accounts. Prices and sales. This is pretty obvious in this section. There's not a lot to show. There's not a lot in show more. It's basically your sales price. I usually will hide the unit price excluding tax because it's usually the same as my unit price. You do have a couple options for picking your profit calculations. In doing so, it'll actually calculate a profit percentage that you can use on reports for items if you want to. You can set up sales prices and discounts if you offer those. You can allow invoice discounts if you offer that, and set up the discount group for that. The sales unit of measure can be different than the purchasing unit of measure. So by saying that, I'm saying you can order a case of 24 of something, but you can sell it as pieces. Just know that those two fields can be different, and I'm going to show you the purchasing unit of measure shortly here. Sales blocked does similar to what the blocking up on the first section that I showed you was, but it will only block sales. You can still purchase more. So you may want to block sales of an item, but you want to still allow purchases of a new item. Usually you see it the other way. You'll block purchasing and allow sales so you can use up excess inventory before you stop selling that product altogether. These last sections, we're not going to spend a lot of time on. I'm just going to show them to you because they're whole sections and classes on their own. Replenishment, however, you can set a default vendor, and when you're doing purchase requisitions, that default vendor will be used to calculate how much inventory you're going to purchase from them and create purchase orders for you. Because you can do a default vendor, you can also do a vendor item number. A lot of times vendors want you to put their item number on their PO, not your item number, so that they know that they're purchasing the correct thing or they're sending you the correct thing. Again, purchase unit of measure doesn't have to be the same as the selling unit of measure. Lead time is something you can fill in. Lead time is something you can fill in if you want to know how long it normally takes for you to get an item into stock. And you can do that as part of your planning process as well, so you get things in on time. Here again, like I mentioned before, you can block purchasing, but keep sales open for posting so that you can use up old inventory and then not have anybody accidentally purchase more of something if you've chosen to discontinue it. There's a lot of other fields here on the side that have to do with manufacturing and assembly. I generally will leave those in. Don't delete them out using personalization. Leave them there because you never know when you're going to start using assemblies. And if you have this here, you'll remember where it is. But generally, when you show less, you're going to have very few fields in here. You'll have the vendor item number, unit of measure, blocking, and possibly the lead time calculation is something you would have in here. Planning. We're not going to cover this. This has to go with how your system can automatically tell you what you need to order, how many you need to order, how often you need to order, all those type of things. It's a whole section in and of itself that we'll cover at a later date. Same thing with item tracking. We're going to have a separate fast class on this, on how to do item tracking. Item tracking actually involves how you use serial numbers and lot numbers in the system. One, there's a setting that you have to turn it on, but then once you start using those, you're required to use them on the items as you go forward. So we'll have a completely separate fast class sometime soon on how to use item tracking in Business Central. And warehouse. I mentioned earlier that there's a shelf location. You can actually set up full warehouse with picks and putaways and counts and a whole bunch of other things that you can do in a warehouse. Again, that's something you probably want to have a separate discussion with. If it's something you're thinking of doing with your partner or Syvantis, we can help you with that as well. Well, that's it for today. We hope you enjoyed the fast class. If there's something we didn't cover or that I missed, or that you'd like more information on, please let us know in the comments and we'll get back to you on it. The topic next week will be create recurring notification emails with Power Automate, which should be really interesting. And we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks.